Our speaker is an author who has a new book out called The Group. Please welcome Dr. Sally Downham Miller.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's so exciting to be here and to be with Purdue women. I like that. And we're talking about, I think, overcoming. Thank you. Overcoming and becoming more than just resilient. I like that in one of the early introductions today, you were talking about resilience. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that today with me. But we've all been through it. We've all experienced adversity. And whether it's been horrible or bearable, we have this in common. And we share what we know and have learned to do with it. And so one of the things that has been going on in our culture popularly right now are all the solution finders, all those people that are going to tell us how to get on with our life and get back to normal. But there's a problem with that. Normal is a measurement of frequency. And when all of the pieces of your life that had become very frequent are changed, we have to begin to look at making a new normal. And guess whose job that is? Yours. Nobody can make a new normal for you. It's yours to think, to consider, and to make a path. And what I've heard from all of you today, you are strong, you are resilient, you love gathering together, and that's obvious. So let's talk about how we can rethink our life, rethink what we are doing. First of all, I think before you can chart a new path, you have to look at what you've learned. And we've learned a lot in the last 18 months, haven't we? David Brooks, a worldwide best-selling author, says in his book, The Second Mountain, when you're going through adversity, stop and look at what you're learning. Even things you didn't want to learn, consider what you have. And so I thought I would share with you some solution finders that just don't fit the regular path that I became familiar with in the past 18 months as I wrote this book and as it came out this summer. The first, I met at a holiday party that our daughter and her husband gave, and they sent out invitations and invited way more people than their house could hold. And it seemed like that they all descended at once. And I found myself standing in a corner with food on a plate and a drink in my hand and no place to put anything down. And so I could drink, but I couldn't do anything about that. And this nice, tall young man standing nearby said, "Looks like you got a problem." I said, "Yes, I do." And we started talking. And of course, I asked him what he did. And he said, I'm with the university. And I said, "Oh, good. What department are you in?" And he said, departments. And I said, "Mike, you don't know what department you're in?" And I'm thinking, what's going on here? And he said, "Well, I do research. And I have a number of different departments that support my work. And so I find myself in a tough place socially when people ask me." I said, "Well, you know what? We're standing here together and we can't get out. Let's come up with a way you can answer this so you don't sound like you're crazy." And so he kind of laughed and I laughed too. And I said, "Well, what is the focus of your research?" And he said, the brain. And I thought, oh, good. I'm spending the night in a corner with a brain researcher. I said, okay, Mike, how can you tell me what it is that you do? And he said, oh, that's easy. And he held his hand up like this. And he said, think of this as your brain. Kind of looks like a brain. And he said, now I'm sure that you know that your thoughts course across the cortex of your brain, and while they're neural impulses, we're going to call them paths or roads. So he was dumbing it down for me. And I said, okay. And he said, oh, and this is just such a maze, and there are so many paths and so many intersections. And all of a sudden, a word popped into my head, and I said, intersections? Synapses. And he went, very good. Like I'd remembered something from Biology 101. And so he said, if you have recurring thoughts, if you have activities that you do over and over again, those paths that those thoughts take begin to form a little groove. And pretty soon, you don't have to think them. They just start. I had furrowed my brow. And he said, let me ask you a question. Do you drive the same way to work every day? I said, yes. And he said, do you stop at the end of your driveway and think, now am I going to turn right or left? And I said, no. And he said, do you in fact drive all the way to work through traffic, making turns, starting, stopping, and you don't always remember the trip until you get to the parking lot? I said, yes. I feel badly about that. And he said, why? And I said, I feel like I'm not paying attention. And he said, have you ever caused a wreck on the way to work? I said, no. He said, so evidently you're paying enough attention. Oh, okay, I said. So I've formed a little groove on the cortex of my brain that, in fact, is how I get to work. And he said, and even more, if when you need to go to the store, the first 5 blocks are on the way to work and the store, you'll keep going back to your work. And I'm like, you're right, I have. I said, well, what do you know about this? And he said, I measure those grooves. And I said, why? And he said, well, that's to help us understand the brain and how people think and how people can take charge of their thinking. Like I just said, we need to do in the aftermath of adversity. So I said, okay, wait a minute. I work with people who are grieving, and they've lost many of the familiar, of the traditional, of the oft-repeated activities and thoughts. What about them? And he said, oh, yeah, that's bad. I said, yeah, I know it's bad, but what about them? And he said, gonna have to make new grooves. And I said, how do you do that? And he said, intentionally. And you practice, practice, practice. Nobody can tell us what to think. Now, I'm not saying there aren't people in your life that have probably been telling you what to think, but nobody gets to think but you, with your own brain. So I'm going to share with you some of the scholars that I spent time reading about when I was doing this book during quarantine. And the Mike the Brain Researcher is the first one. And it's so funny, when we finished talking, he said, thank you so much for asking me about my work. Nobody asked me about my work. And I said, you explained it very well. The teacher in you came through. The second one is a woman by the name of Ann Maston, a very celebrated professor at the University of Minnesota. And she has written a book called Ordinary Magic, and has studied for 20 or 25 years, done research in the area of resilience. And her book, remember this, Ordinary Magic, she says she has found that resilience is a skill. It's not a personality trait. It isn't with somebody that's an upbeat, peppy personality. She said it's a part of who we are. It's a part of our DNA. It's a part of our culture. It's a part of our biology. And all you have to do is practice some things. This idea of being intentional and practicing is a part of what we're doing, what we can do while going through difficult times. So she says there are protective factors that help increase resilience in your life. And they are things like close relationships, capable friends around you. You know, it's always like when we were growing up, somebody was always saying to us, just don't hang out with the wrong people. Well, she's saying, hang out with good, capable adults, which I think is the same thing. Regulating emotions, feeling motivated to succeed, believing that you can succeed. There's a quote from Henry Ford, who I don't know that I'd call him one of the scholars that I studied, but I like this quote. And Henry Ford was the one who invented the assembly line manufacturing process for automobiles. I think he knows something about success. And he said this, if you think you can, or you think you can't, you're right. So how we think, what we think, and who we hang out with to motivate us and them as we go through times like this together. So what are those things that you can do? She said right at the top of the list is your health and exercise. Your health and exercise. We've been hearing that enough for a long time, but that does not diminish its importance. Also says taking yoga, mindfulness. Now here, you know, when you hear the word mindfulness, you think that this is some Eastern tradition that some people are trying out. It's been here a long time, long time. And one of the great activities of a mindful life is meditating. But meditating is emptying your mind, emptying it, not filling it up. So I've never understood mindfulness, but I guess mind emptying doesn't sound like a good project to go to. She says, create fun in your life. Use prayer. Once again, believing what you think is or is not going to happen is a part of attending to that with mind, heart, and spirit. Calming your fears and planfulness. When I first read that, I thought it was a typo, but it's not. It's like, be a good planner. I have communicated with Mary Gail as she planned this, as she gathered this wonderful group of people that do so much, and finds delight in her planfulness. Am I right? Thank you. And once again, we hear the words, practice. Do these things and practice them. When we think about how we think, there's another handbook that was in my husband's library that I took and began reading. And it's called the Handbook of Positive Emotions. And this handbook of by Tugade, Shiola, and Kirby. And what the research is they've done is they've found the scientific links to positive thoughts. And they turned out just as you would think they might, with positive cardiology, with health monitoring that is like a part of what you do all the time, not just something you pay attention to for 3 or 4 months. It is an increased immune response of your immune system and morbidity and mortality that is positive. You live a long time. You probably could have written those things down. But here's what's important about what they studied. The effects of negative thoughts. Negative thoughts, people think that they are stronger and they stick with you more. If you're ruminating about something and it's a negative thought, I think everyone's getting a phone call at once. Did we all text each other and say, call me back? Negative thinking is not stronger than positive thinking, but it's narrower. And what it does is builds cortisol in your circulatory system and clogs your arteries. It compromises your immune system. If allowed to linger, it limits subsequent learning and creativity. So what they have showed, we always talk about positive things, are the negative things. So choosing to think positively is a part of your assignment as we go through this difficult time and the others that come. She says things that you need to incorporate in your life are humor, pride, love, compassion, gratitude, elevation. When was the last time you felt lifted up? Melissa, this story of spam clam. You do tend to say spam clam, I noticed. Lift you up. What causes you to feel awe? Those are the things that she suggests. And I'm grateful to those scholars. And then there's another scholar that I'm grateful to that I studied while I was writing this book. And it is a man by the name of Thomas Cottle. And Dr. Cottle is another celebrated professor at the University of Chicago. And he studied resilience too. As a matter of fact, he and his graduate students went into the disadvantaged neighborhoods in New York City and found out what is it that happens to some people when they're living in a disadvantaged place, drive-by shootings, drugs, parents sometimes that are not able to be there for their children. And some rise up and become neurosurgeons, and others that are musicians, and others that do astounding things, dance masters. And New York City, in its difficult areas, celebrate those people. But Dr. Cottle and his team said, how did they do that? What was different about them that helped them rise out of a terrible time? So here's what they found out. You have to have one person. Nice to have more, but one person who believes in you. one person that you know you can trust, one person who you know is on your side. So that's what they found. And then they found that the whole issue of believing that something positive is in your future. They said, this is just for now. I know it's bad, it's terrible. I have a brother who died of a drug overdose, but something good is coming. And so you can see, and of course there are many other things, but this all has to do with how you think. And then Dr. Cottle went a step beyond that and began to talk about how we think by talking about self-talk. What do you say to yourself? Is it positive? Do you say, I can't do that? Do you say, I'm too technology challenged? What do you say? And remember what we learned about negative thoughts is we tend to repeat them over and over and over again. And so Dr. Cottle came up with this saying about talking to yourself, who you are. Listen to what he says. The self is the story. The self tells the self about the self. So, these other people, think about Ann Mastens and think about Henry Ford and think about them. People that are saying, if you believe, if you think positively, you will move positively. In the last year or so, this was during COVID, I think my husband Will, who is with us today, along with my grandson Aaron, handsome men they both are, yay, that how you think can change your brain. He's been studying neuro everything. And I love this thought. Can we change our brain by how we think? The answer is yes. Then, if how we think changes our brain, if we are the only ones that can change our mind, other people try to tell us to change our mind, but we're the only ones that can, then what is our goal? And our goal is happiness. We want to lead a happy, fulfilled life. And all of these horrible things that are going on in our world right now tend to really get in the way of us thinking about that. There was a 75-year study conducted by Harvard starting in the 1930s, and it's called the Harvard Happiness Study. It kind of shocks you, doesn't it? Harvard cares about happiness. Well, they did it, and they took a group of students from Harvard, male students, and a similar group of male individuals who lived in disadvantaged areas of Boston. They're called Southies in South Boston. And they followed their lives for 75 years. Well, I'm sorry to say that President John Kennedy was a part of the original work, and of course, he died young. But they followed these people for 75 years, giving their annual health test, giving them blood analyses, giving them all kinds of interviews and inquiries about how things were going. And here's what they concluded. Number one, social connections are vital to a happy life. Here we are again, talking about the people around us and what kind of people around us do we, this group is fabulous at this. What are you doing about your individual life when you're not with these Purdue women? Do you have enough connections where you can say, I feel some joy. I really am happy. I heard some of the women around my table talking about, oh, how much they love this interest group and that interest group and all the things they do. Oh, somebody said, I'm so disappointed that we can't take the chartered bus to shop in Chicago. That'll come back. Social connections indicate you live longer. 2, quality more than quantity of relationships matter. There's what goes with that is life satisfaction and good health. Marriages, good marriages include bickering. Don't you love that word? That's in their report. You can look it up when you go home. Include bickering. Honey, I think we do that very well. But here's what matters in the marriage: trust, commitment, and respect. And the 4th finding was loneliness kills. So we have all these different people talking to us. They're all saying relationships are so important. They're all saying how you think matters. They're all saying you can change your own life based on what you think. And as a matter of fact, Professor Waldinger, yep, that's his name if you Google this, says about happiness and this study and what they found: lean into your relationships as much as you lean into your professional endeavors. Your life depends upon it. So are we looking for a new normal? Well, the new normal is going to come whether we look for it or not. But what we can do is chart the course and practice what we're doing. All these people say you have to practice things because your brain's already about the job of recalibrating. When you go through a crisis or a hard time or anything, your mind's working on it. Help your mind take you where you want to go. New normal can't go back to the old normal. Life goes forward. And I have every confidence in the world that you are just the women to chart the course and lead us forward. I hope this has been helpful. Thank you. Thank you.